Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Ned Bellavance, Ned1313 on Twitter, and welcome to the Daily Check-In for July 8th, 2020. It's Wednesday, and that means it's Tech Analysis Wednesday, and I had something all queued up. I knew what I was going to talk about. Cloud Field Day 8 is next week. Some sponsors have been added. I know what panel I'm on. I was going to talk about all that, and then out of nowhere, Suse decided to acquire Rancher, and I'm like, well, that's probably more important than my Cloud Field Day 8 stuff, so I can talk about that later. Let's talk about what's going on there. Now, before we do that, I want to get a few housekeeping items under wraps. First of all, for those of you who don't know, I have a podcast that looks at cloud type things. It's called Day 2 Cloud. It's what happens after you've migrated your stuff to the cloud and I have to operate it now. And the episode from last week was an absolutely fantastic episode. It was all about app security in the cloud with Tanya Janka. She was amazing, enthusiastic, and so knowledgeable. My brain wanted to just like explode. So I will include a link to that in the description and the show notes. So definitely go check out that episode. I can't recommend it enough. I don't have anything else for housekeeping, so I just want to check in with you. Let's check in. How are you doing? It's Wednesday. Wednesdays aren't bad. We're halfway through the week. Things are going okay. I got to cut down a giant limb off of a tree yesterday that was probably, I'm going to go with about 25 feet up in the air. That's fun. I don't like getting on ladders and I don't like using that long pole to like saw through it, but it's what I had to do because it's a 4-week wait right now for any tree services to come out because there's been so much storm damage. Plus, they're backlogged from all the COVID stuff. So I got to cut it down myself, and that was exciting. Big crash. I'll post a picture on Twitter of my bounty, but it's the second limb to fall off this tree. So now I'm a little concerned about the tree. I hope it makes it because it provides a lot of awesome shade. So that's what's going on with me. Again, I hope you're doing okay. Let's talk about this acquisition that was announced today with breathless press releases that come out and all the jargon in there. Okay, so there's two companies involved here. Well, there's more, but we'll start with the two companies. First, there's Suse, and secondly, there's Rancher. So Suse is the acquirer. They're buying Rancher. If you haven't ever heard of Rancher, I'll probably talk about what they do first. So Rancher was founded about 6 years ago, and their primary focus was all around Kubernetes and managing Kubernetes. Now, at the time, they thought that the best way to go about that was to have their own operating system on which you would deploy Kubernetes and a platform to manage multiple Kubernetes clusters. And that made a lot of sense. So they had RKE, which is their enterprise Linux distribution to run Kubernetes. And then they have the Rancher platform, which allows you to manage multiple Kubernetes clusters. It's pretty ahead of its time and a very awesome product. I've played around with it a bit. Then they started looking towards the edge and realized that Kubernetes has a lot included in it that might not be necessary and doesn't work well with constrained environments where you don't have a lot of resources. So they reconfigured or refactored or whatever Kubernetes to be much smaller and leaner and came out with K3S. You get it? Because it's smaller than K8S. Anyway, so they came out with K3S, and that's a distribution that you can put on a Raspberry Pi. It's very friendly in terms of size and weight. I actually have over in my little tinkering area, I have 4 Raspberry Pis, and 3 of them are running K3S. So obviously, I'm kind of a little invested in this. And then the last thing is they have this thing called Longhorn, which is a storage platform for Kubernetes that they've contributed to the CNCF. So that, like, they've got a bunch of stuff going on, but it's all Kubernetes focused. Okay, so Suse, you've probably heard the name. They've been around since 94. 94. I was in high school, but they've been around for a long time. And they're probably best known for their enterprise Linux distribution and the OpenSUSE distribution that's open source. So if you're more in the Red Hat sphere of things, it's kind of similar to how there's Red Hat Enterprise Linux and CentOS. So CentOS is the open source version. Anybody can run it, but it's not really supported. And then there's Red Hat Enterprise Linux, which you pay for. Well, you pay for support and they will support you. So SUSE Enterprise Linux is kind of the same thing. It's SLES, I think, is the acronym they use. Okay, so that's what they're probably best known for. And the other thing that they're really well known for, and the only time I've ever actually used SUSE was for SAP. For whatever reason, SAP and SUSE Linux are like peanut butter and jelly. And so the one time I actually had to go and bootstrap an SAP environment for a client, they wanted SUSE Linux running on all of the machines that were going to be part of this environment. So I had to, it's another variant of Linux, so not a big deal, but okay. So that's how I know them. But apparently they also have this thing that they're calling CaaS. It's basically containers as a service. It's their container management, deployment, and development platform. And I would equate it to OpenShift. It's very similar in that regard. Okay, so they had a container story, but they probably didn't have a really strong multi-cluster Kubernetes story. And so I think that's part of the reason that they were shopping around. Now, before I get into kind of what I'm thinking in terms of why Rancher was acquired by SUSE, I do want to do a little bit of history about SUSE. So they have been bounced around a lot as a company. They were acquired by Novell back in like 2003. And then Novell was acquired by Attachmate, which was then shifted to Micro Focus. And then finally, SUSE was spun out as an independent business as part of EQT Partners in March of 2019. So this entire time between like 2003 and 2019, they've been part of a larger organization, not able to make their own acquisitions, and probably somebody else is sort of telling them what to do from not telling them what to do, but restricting them from an innovation perspective. Now that they are a little more than a year out from being an independent company that can start investing, I'm sure they got all their financial cards in order. They've kind of sorted what they wanted to do, and they're looking for where are their gaps in their portfolio where they would want to make an acquisition. And I think the answer to that was they looked around and said, we have this CaaS platform, but we don't have a really strong multi-cluster Kubernetes offering. And if we look at what other companies are doing, especially open source companies, that's the direction that they're focused at the moment. That's the big cool thing. So if you look at all the cloud providers, you've got Google with their Anthos platform trying to manage Kubernetes both in Google Cloud and also in your on-prem environment. So that sort of hybrid multi-cluster message. Azure is doing the same thing. They've got Azure Stack, which can run AKS or an instance of AKS. They've got AKS in public Azure, and then they've also got Azure Arc, which is a management platform that lets you manage Kubernetes clusters in a hybrid way. So they've got that. Other companies that aren't public cloud providers but are doing this multi-cluster management thing, you've got Diamanti and Weaveworks. Diamanti is going to be on Cloud Field Day next week, so look out for that. And then also Vmware is doing their whole Tanzu thing where they have Tanzu, I think it's called Mission Control, that lets you do the multi-cluster management. And then they're also offering Kubernetes as part of vSphere. Okay, so they're all doing this Kubernetes multi-cluster management. And I think it's kind of becoming a game of musical chairs. Whoever doesn't have a Kubernetes multi-cluster solution when the music stops loses. And so SUSE is looking and going, okay, Red Hat's got their thing. All the public cloud providers have their thing. We need something as part of our platform. And oh, look, Rancher is, killing it on their front. They're doing really well. They've been funded a bunch of times. They're ripe for either going public or being acquired. And we're going to acquire them. And we have the capital to do it because we're owned by a global investment firm that has capital we can use. Makes perfect sense. Now, I want to read the quote because this is interesting. In the press release, and I love press releases, right? Because they're kind of ridiculous. The quote from the CEO of SUSE said, "By combining Rancher's strength in containers with our strengths in enterprise Linux, edge computing, and AI, we will redefine and jointly disrupt the market to help customers accelerate their digital transformation journeys with true open source solutions. There is no doubt in my mind with our first acquisition as an independent company, we are paving the way for two leading companies with so many complementary strengths to become even stronger together." Okay, so a lot of PR language in there, and it's exhausting to read it sometimes because so many buzzwords, right? But basically what they're saying is we've got enterprise Linux, we've got some edge computing stuff, and Rancher is awesome with Kubernetes and multi-cluster management, and they have their edge stuff too. So we know the edge is the future. We know Kubernetes multi-cluster is the future. We are going to make this purchase and combine our resources. And he made sure to mention that that it's now an independent company that's making this acquisition. And I would expect in the next 6 to 12 months that there will be additional acquisitions by Suse as they try to expand their portfolio. Because fun fact, after Red Hat was acquired, Suse is now the largest independent open source software company in the world. And they're going to want to bulk out that portfolio, or who knows, maybe they'll be acquired by somebody else. The world is strange. So on the other side, the Rancher CEO, he's taking over the engineering and innovation groups within Suse. So he's going to ramp them up and kind of get them integrated with what Rancher's doing. And Rancher, in turn, gets a bunch of doors and prospects opened to them, especially at the enterprise level, which might have been difficult before because they were a smaller startup. So those are my thoughts on the acquisition. I think it's a net positive for both companies. And I expect that Suse will make additional acquisitions in the next 6 to 12 months in the Kubernetes sphere, and also to round out the rest of their portfolio. So it should be pretty interesting to watch what happens. Those are my thoughts. Tomorrow is Thursdays on the Edge, so we'll talk about an Edge topic. I haven't figured out what yet, but it'll be a surprise for you and for me. Until then, stay healthy and stay safe. Stay safe. Thanks.